Good afternoon and welcome to the first of the afternoon sessions of day 2 of OutC. I'm delighted to be welcoming Rod Cullen, Kate Soper and Emily Webb with us, and they're going to delve into the exploration of student experience as we've shifted fully online, and consider that we're not all in the same boat, but we are possibly all in the same storm. Over to you, Rod.
Thank you very much, Roger. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Can we get the slides on screen, please, Debbie? We're working as a team today, so I'll be kind of doing most of the presenting, and Kate and Emily, who I'll introduce to you now. We've got Emily Webb, who's part of our technology enhanced learning team, and Kate Soper, who's also part of the same team. We've been working very closely together on this particular project, but they're going to be delving away in the background, keeping an eye on the comments on YouTube while I do most of the talking this afternoon. So I think I'd probably better start by giving you a tiny bit of background to our institution, because that's quite important in the context of the stories that we've got to tell. Manchester Met is a large post-92 university. We've got about 38,000 students. We've got a very diverse student cohort. I've got a list of sort of stats there. I'm not going to go through those, but I want to draw your attention to the fact that we've got a lot of students who live locally at home, who come from low participation neighbourhoods, and may be the first person in their family who are coming to university. So other than in their university experience, they haven't got a deep network of support for their learning outside of the institution. Before the COVID pandemic happened, I would have described this as a primarily blended learning type of delivery, but the significant focus of our provision is on teaching face-to-face, enhanced somewhat by our virtual learning environment to different degrees across the institution. In response to the pandemic, we perhaps were a little atypical in that we did a massive shift in our curriculum structure, and we moved to a block delivery model. And that block delivery model had students studying one 30 credit unit at a time, or two 15 credit units at a time, if that was the structure of their course, over a 6-week block with an assessment week at the end, before a little break, and then moving on to a second block of teaching. So they had 4 individual blocks of teaching over the academic year, but only studying one unit at a time in the majority of cases. As part of our preparation over the summer before the start of the academic year, we rapidly rolled out Microsoft Teams and integrated it into our Moodle virtual learning environment. Part of our support mechanism was an attempt to try and divide up all of the cohorts, regardless of their size, into smaller groups of 15 to 25 students with a specified tutor to basically to guide them through their 6 weeks of study. That was an aspirational thing. It didn't always happen across the institution. In preparation for the learning design, we encouraged our teaching colleagues to make use of a learning spaces framework to design their online delivery. I won't say too much of that. There's a whole kind of session presentation on that by itself. But in the context of this presentation, we encouraged staff to think about making use of a live teaching space like we're engaging in now, an instructional space for the student activities in the Moodle area, a collaboration space making use of the channel spaces in Microsoft Teams, and where the COVID rules allowed it, to transition into the use of the physical campus space wherever that was possible. And that was very difficult for colleagues to predict, unfortunately, as I'm sure most of you are aware. At Manchester Met, we've been undertaking an annual internal student survey, what we refer to as the ISS, every year for the last approximately 15 years. It's a very simple survey with a series of Likert scale questions, with importantly a set of paired free text response questions that students can tell us what the best thing about their courses are and what things are most in need of improvement. For the 2021 academic year, we tweaked that survey slightly to include more free text questions about the sorts of things that they were experiencing during that year of study. And in December 2020, we had 6,000 students responded to the survey and left about 47,000 free text comments. Our analysis that we're talking about today focused on one pair of free text questions in response to the question, what have you enjoyed or valued most from online activities, and what have you found most difficult about online activities? And so in response to those particular questions, we had a total of just over 3,200 comments, split between about 1,300 that were things that students have enjoyed or valued, and nearly 2,000 that they had found difficult. So it's sort of a 40-60 split in terms of the ratio of those responses. We've really immersed ourselves deeply in the comments that we received from students, and we developed a couple of coding frameworks, one for the things that students enjoyed or valued, split into sort of five main categories with a finer level of resolution of specific themes within each of those particular categories. That coding framework has allowed us to look at the frequency at which particular comments repeat throughout the student data set that we've explored. So we're able to see which things are most important, which things are most prevalent across those students who've responded to the data. So we've got one for enjoyed or valued, and one for the difficulties that students have experienced. What that's allowed us to do at the top level, looking at the categories, is we've been able to look at the frequency of comments that fit into particular categories. And we've used these radar diagrams to give us a simple comparison. And the top level narrative that we got from that is that positive experiences of live teaching sessions and self-paced asynchronous activities are what seem to contribute the most to a general positive experience of online learning. And experiences of organizational and technical difficulties, coupled with a poor experience of live teaching sessions, seem to contribute most towards a generally poor online learning experience. So it's a really kind of high level narrative. And what we've noticed, which is different from our previous ISS analysis, is where in the past, if we looked at one cohort of students, their experience seemed to be very, very similar, i.e. a particular course was a good experience or a particular course was a poor experience. What we're seeing is a lot of differences from individuals or groups of individuals experiencing the same thing and perceiving it very, very differently. So we've taken that a stage further. We've gone into the categories and we've looked at the specific themes, and we're able to look at the frequency of comments around the particular themes as well. And where those themes are repeating more, or we're seeing more of those themes, we're placing a slightly greater emphasis on the narrative that surrounds them. So we've done that for the things that students have enjoyed or valued, and we've done that for things that students have found difficult as well. So the size of the pie charts themselves relates to the frequency of comments, and obviously the slice of the size of the pie relates to the frequency of comments that have coded in that particular way. We have discovered a huge number of narratives from the work that we've done, and we're only able to focus on 3 of those today, and we've tried to align them with the themes of the conference. So we're going to talk to you a little bit about narratives around the home and remote working spaces, social and interpersonal spaces, and live online spaces. If you could just share, Debbie, the link to the Padlet that we set up. We're really interested in seeing how our experiences and those of our students compare with your experience and those of your students. So we've set up a Padlet. If you I just tab to that, wrong one. It looks a little bit like this. If you want to make a contribution to any of the narratives as we go through it, just click on the plus and you can add your little story. Once other people have added theirs in, you can give it a thumbs up if you agree, or a thumbs down if you disagree, or you can add your own comment onto there as well. And hopefully we'll be able to come back to that towards the end of in the Q&A session. So our first narrative is around home stroke remote working spaces. And some of our students have told us, in the context of the things that they've enjoyed or valued, is that the way that we approached it was just the right thing to do in the context of the pandemic, that they felt safe studying remotely from home. And that was something which was really important and valuable to them. A lot of these students were also telling us that I've really enjoyed working from the comfort of my own home. I've got a really nice working space. I've got my bedroom, or I've got a workspace at home. That's allowing me to focus more effectively on my work, and keep my concentration. Um, for some students, there were specific aspects of the online environment which they found advantageous. So one student here telling us that they have a hearing problem and that sometimes they struggle with that while they're in a large teaching classroom. Online, they've got their headphones on and they can hear things much better. Another student telling us that when they're in class, that often their view of the slides is blocked, but being near to the screen improved their overall experience. And that's kind of tied into, for some students, a preference for their own, using their own devices at home and their home setup, having a good broadband internet connection. For example, having access to a second monitor while they're in live teaching sessions, or while they're working independently online, taking better notes. And so those students are clearly in an environment where the workspace that they've got is advantageous to a positive experience of online learning. And we contrast to that with the other group of students who are telling us, yeah, I feel safe, it's the right thing to do and everything. However, there's a but associated with it. And that but is that at home, I'm really distracted. So this student here, I live in a shared space. The Wi-Fi only works in the living room, but other students are in that space. Or this other student here who's homeschooling children, and that's difficult to kind of to manage in the context of their online independent learning. Other students tell us that the space that they've got is just not appropriate for working. I don't have a desk. I've not got the right setup. I'm working at the kitchen table, that kind of thing. Not conducive to effective learning. And that kind of coupled with a whole load of issues around, I didn't have a laptop that was appropriate at the beginning. I've had to buy it. I've had to upgrade my broadband. I've had to pay for this. I've had to buy a new laptop because my course is particularly demanding in terms of the IT that's required, and a really difficult experience for some students from a technical point of view, contributing to a poor overall experience of online learning. Our second narrative that's emerged is tied into kind of the social and interpersonal spaces that people find themselves in. So some of our students have told us that the online environment has been very connected and empowering. They found it very easy to build relationships with fellow students who they've never met, that they've been really comfortable in speaking online. And for some of these students, it's actually felt like a real campus experience. And that's kind of really interesting for us to hear. Tied in with this is a flexible aspect to self-paced provision that allows students to fit in learning around complicated home lives. So if you've got homeschooling children, being able to do the school run, but then to dip in to look at recordings of sessions and online videos, or work through self-paced activities. And that self-paced nature where it's been made available has been a really positive aspect of these students' experience. We contrast that some of the comments were very, very challenging to read. There's a lot of evidence of students feeling very isolated, feeling lonely, confused by the experience, not being able to form proper friendships, and at times it was quite a difficult read in that respect. And that was kind of exacerbated, or that those feelings of loneliness exacerbated other problems that the students were experiencing. Like, if their timetable was keeping changing, they had nobody to go to speak to, no peers to get support from in that respect, not being able to find resources, particularly where staff were being really pushed to make resources available in a short space of time. Just that whole kind of notion of struggling to keep up and being isolated and on their own. This also kind of fits in with something that we noticed around the use of breakout rooms. For some students, the use of breakout rooms have been absolutely fantastic. They've had a great experience. They've found them participatory and engaging, and it's really encouraged them to be involved and help them to get to know other students. For other students, breakout rooms have led to a great deal of anxiety, and some students really don't like being put into breakout rooms and find it very stressful and difficult to talk to other students, particularly if other students, they feel that the other students are not engaged as well. We think to some extent this is down to the way that those breakout room activities have been constructed and have been set up, and maybe there's something that we can learn from that. Our final narrative is around the experience of live online spaces. Again, some students have said that they've really embraced these things. The flexibility of being able to attend classes from home has allowed them to make better use of their time. They're not wasting time commuting. They're able to organize things around their complex home lives, but also being able to access some of the live sessions on phones, laptops, or computers gives them a degree of flexibility that's really important. For some students, they felt very interactive, particularly where colleagues have been using things like Padlets and Kahoots and Mentimeter in conjunction with during their live teaching spaces. They've really felt like they've had a kind of an interactive experience. And in that respect, it's been very participatory, and a lot of them have reported that they feel more likely to contribute due to the semi-anonymity that they have in live teaching sessions than they would do in normal face-to-face teaching. So that was kind of interesting to see. And finally, a couple of them said that there are things that we can do online that we don't seem to get in class. So, for example, bringing in guest lecturers from abroad or from industry has been a feature of a lot of our online provision. That's been very, very well received. And for some students, they recognise that they're developing communication skills that'll be really important for them in their future careers. We contrast that with some students who've just found it a really difficult experience, that the online lecturers don't count as a replacement for their face-to-face teaching. It's not the same kind of experience, particularly prevalent in courses where there are practical skills and practical development. Students kind of feel that they're missing out on important aspects of their learning. For this group of students as well, they're reporting that they're experiencing what you're experiencing now, which is kind of a death by PowerPoint kind of experience, somebody talking at them, and that isn't engaging to them. And this particularly sort of emphasized where other students don't switch on their cameras, and so they're feeling kind of, well, I will if they will, and there's an element of not wanting to be the first one to expose yourself, if that makes sense. And for some students, they're saying that that they're less likely to contribute in live teaching sessions. They find it more exposing to be speaking in those online forums. So there's a real contrast between these different groups of students. And for some, it's just an overwhelming experience. The slides are moving through too fast. There's stuff going on in the chat. I'm trying to take notes. It's all moving on too quickly. I've got to be in several places at once, particularly if they're having to use multiple devices to engage with a particular session. So just to kind of sum up then, because we need to leave a little bit of time for questions. The sorts of things that we're observing is a split in the experience. Several divisions are occurring. So we've got a digital divide. And to return to our nautical theme, what we've got are some students who are in a fairly modern boat. They've got all of the bells and whistles, all of the navigation tools that help them to steer the boat in the direction that they want to go. For others, they're in something which is kind of not as enabling, that they're more at the mercy of external factors that doesn't allow them to be in control. We have a perception that pre-COVID, for this group of students, the physical spaces that we provide in the institution, the computer labs, the drop-in rooms, etc., act as a sort of a life preserver, enabling them to engage in what we perceive to be remote learning, whereas in fact, that some of our students are at a disadvantage in that they're very reliant on the physical spaces in the institution to do that kind of extracurricular work and activities. So it's something that we need to think about. In terms of the social divide, we've got some students they're in one boat. Their primary focus is their university work. Whereas for other students, they kind of feel like they're in lots of little boats, and some of those are related to their university experience. Some of them are related to schooling their kids. Some of them are carer responsibilities. Some are related to part-time work, etc. And they're being blown in all sorts of different directions. And for those students, the flexibility that's been offered by online learning is often mitigated some of those challenges. And so going forward, thinking about how our providing access to physical, online and mobile learning spaces is maybe something that we can think of in terms of designing a more flexible curriculum. In terms of the students themselves, there's clearly a preference. Some students feel like with online learning, they're on a kind of cruise liner where they've got access to all of the facilities that they need, often kind of exacerbated by the digital divide, but they're able to kind of take advantage of all of those facilities. Whereas some students are perceiving online learning as being very constrained and confined environment, more like a submarine where there's nowhere for them to go, and they've been taken somewhat under the waves at times. And I think we've got a little bit of work to do there in respect of developing students' learning skills. The final thing is the learning experience. There's clearly an element of the design of the learning that we're exposing to, and to some experience this relates to the experience of the captain of the ship. If we've got a captain who's really comfortable with online learning, has delivered online provision before, they've been much more comfortable with that kind of delivery, and from our research seem to have been much more successful, and that relates to ongoing future staff development and training provision on our part. So I will stop there. I think we've got a few minutes left over. Thank you for listening. I hope you found it insightful. We certainly have, but we'll hopefully be able to respond to any questions.
Thank you very much, Rod. It was a fantastic presentation. There's quite a lot of discussion in the chat room around the block delivery, and Carla raised the question, was the block delivery a response for the whole university? Why did you decide to go for that? And then there's quite a few other comments there. Do you just want to talk around the block delivery? Is it something the entire university can adopt for everything?
Yeah, the block delivery was a strategic decision from our academic senior leadership. It was kind of tied into, first of all, a perception that we could, it would allow us to develop the first block and put a lot of the support resources into a relatively small number of courses, and then we would be able to transfer that support to block 2, block 3, and block 4 going forward. From an academic point of view, it was also kind of felt that it would be easy for students studying one unit at a time. We could put more support in front of them in that respect, and also it sort of tied into hoping that we would be able to get back on campus. So the cohorts were nominally divided into study groups of 25 students, and if we were able to come back onto campus, we were going to bring them back onto campus in those groups of 20 to 25 students. So if one student in that study group became ill, we could help that particular group to self-isolate without isolating the whole cohort. So there was a sort of a strategy there that was tied into our overall kind of response to the pandemic. I think with hindsight, it was incredibly challenging for our academic colleagues to completely redesign what had previously been semester-long courses and deliver them in 6 weeks, and a real challenge for colleagues to. There was a feeling that it was really important to cover content, and with our learning spaces framework, we were trying to encourage people to think more about delivering activities rather than delivering content. But it's a huge leap to ask people who've never taught before to really revamp everything that they were doing. So it was very difficult. Some colleagues really thrived in it, absolutely loved it, want to stick with block delivery for other colleagues, it's been a very Marmite experience.
I'm sure your quality service or equivalent enjoyed the revalidating everything as well, which I know ours don't change. I'm afraid, Rod, we've run out of time for the session. It's really interesting. There's further discussion in the comments there that Emily and Kate have picked up on. There's interest in the surveys as well. So in Discord, we could continue the conversation there. And maybe answer some of the questions there, but I'm afraid we'll have to draw the session to a close now.
Very happy to